Today's presentation will be about all wrapped up, a rundown on local situational and food packaging alternatives. First, I'd like to open up the presentation with the state of our environment. Now, there's a lot of talk about climate change, and climate change in relation to solid waste management is something that I'd like the audience to have an understanding of. With climate change, the issue really is about increasing temperatures, um, typhoons, and droughts that are experienced globally. And to respond to this, the global community have already made a commitment under the Paris Agreement to address climate change and to come up with measurable actions to avert the increasing temperatures by keeping it at 1.5 degree or a maximum of 2-degree increase. Of course, the Philippines always feels the effect of climate change, the effect of natural calamities. We are visited by typhoons. We also experience droughts in our agricultural areas, which has led for our government with agreement. This target requires some foreign funding. The big emissions would be and transportation. Has to be our now for waste of the waste series and opens actually coming from the man. Now litter everywhere. This is one of the bigger challenges that the Philippines experiences as far as waste management. You see litter in the streets, litter in our tributaries and our waterways, which results into clogged waterways, which really, ends up into flooding. There are challenges in waste disposal in the country. Of course, in 2000, we had the Payatas tragedy. And then in 2011, we experienced a trash light in Baguio. 2011 is celebrating the 10th year anniversary of the Ecological Solid Waste Management Act. So obviously, we have not learned our lessons. And the challenge really with open and controlled dump sites is that it reaches to the environment. Not only will it affect the wastewater system or the water system, it also leads to polluting our oceans. Now, it becomes a threat to marine habitat. The challenges with marine litter is really evidenced by recent studies. And it pollutes our oceans. In 2015, a study was made by the University of Georgia that pointed to marine debris and plastic waste inputs to land as an area of concern. It says that among the mitigation strategies that needs to be done would be the reduction of plastic consumption, material product design, a reduced waste generation. We need to improve global waste management and improve litter capture and reduce input, to the waterways. If we don't do this by 2050, the study claims that there would be more plastics than fish in the ocean. Now, if you look at the study, it ranked the Philippines as number 3 as the source of waste in the marine environment or plastic waste in the marine environment. The Philippine government did not really support this, but we do recognize that there is waste that needs to be managed in a developing country like the Philippines. Now, the study does not come without flaws. If you look at this, it is close to impossible for Sri Lanka to have, a waste generation rate that is much higher or even double that of the United States. It's more than 10 times that of the Philippines for a low-income country. A recent study again that came out from the Ocean Cleanup and Science Advances points to our river waste. We are now not anymore number 3, but number 1 in sources of plastic that ends up into our river waste. We believe that the study needs to be improved because it makes a lot of general assumptions, and with the archipelagic nature of the Philippines, with a lot of tributaries given that that landscape, no? Then we would definitely be on top of the list of those assumptions. No? Let's look at the market. No? As I have told you, 100 million population. We are a low middle income country, archipelagic in nature. We still have a high dependence on single-use plastic applications. Why? Because of the capacity or purchasing capacity of our Filipino people. The bulk who belong into the DE category really would depend on single-use plastic or for their daily sustenance. We still have that habit of going to the wet market to buy our fresh goods. Unlike in developing countries that you don't really see a lot of wet markets, everybody goes in supermarkets. But this is where the Philippines is. And unless our GDP grows to a level of developing countries, and if the dream of NEDA that in 2030 or 2040, the Philippines will transition into a high-income country, maybe that's a time that we would see lesser dependence on single-use, small, tingy culture or sachet in applications. Now let's look at the Ecological Solid Waste Management Act of 2000, or the RA 9003. It was enacted in 2000, in the year 2000, with the IRR finalized in 2001. The law mandates segregation at source. So please ask yourselves, how many of you segregate at home? And I hope that you do, because there are penalties provided by the law. It also mandates segregated collection. So even if we segregate at home, sometimes the frustration is that when it gets collected, it gets mixed. And sometimes even with the segregated collection, at the end of the day, it goes to the same landfill. Again, this is because we do not have the proper or the amount of infrastructure needed to really manage our waste. Now, the law prescribes mandatory waste diversion, meaning there should be a small, over time, the amount of waste that needs to go to the landfills should be reduced or decreased. When the law was enacted, it was set at 25%. And now the National Solid Waste Management Commission is actually mandating 50% as part of the 10-year solid waste management plans submitted by the local government units. Now, the law also requires establishment of barangay level material recovery facilities. Now, that means that 42,000 barangays in the country will need to establish or cluster with other barangays to establish their material recovery facilities so that the biodegradable waste can be composted and the recyclable waste can be collected and diverted for recycling. Now, closure of open and controlled dumps had been mandated since 2006. The bigger challenge really is that this has not happened until this year. Now, if you look on the right side, we look at the waste hierarchy. Now, the waste hierarchy actually points to avoidance. Waste avoidance is critical in waste hierarchy. It is important for us to avoid generating waste in the first place. Go through the principle of 3 R's, which is reduce, reuse, and recycle. When you go to the supermarket, bring your own bag so that you won't need to get your plastic bag or paper bags from the supermarkets, or even bring home those carton boxes. Reuse. Buy quality materials that you can reuse and refurbish or recondition. If at the end of life you don't need it anymore, why don't you donate it? Then you recycle. Recycling and composting is really key to waste management. But the more important fact of this is that it needs the support and the cooperation of people like you and me. The general public needs to help. Recovery. Now, waste needs to be treated, especially for hazardous and infectious waste. Okay, and there are other waste treatment technologies that are available to reduce the amount of waste that will actually be sent out to the landfills. Now, the National Solid Waste Management Commission, with the help of JICA, was able to develop the Waste Analysis and Characterization Study, or WACS. The guidelines for WACS really helps us in identifying where your waste belongs to. The colors represent the color coding system that we have for the waste. And we hope that over time, when whichever city you go, now the green trash bin is actually for bio-waste. The blue trash bin is for recyclables, whether it's plastics, paper, glass, or metals. Residual waste would be distributed into gray, which is residuals with a potential for recycling, and residuals that will need to go to disposal. Now, what's interesting here is that we try to summarize as of the date of the development, items that are recyclable in the local context, and you will find it here, and items that has a potential for recycling, no? Which is in gray. Residuals with potential for recycling would include sachets, okay, would include your tarps, straws, plastic bags, right? And even leather, you know. There would be waste that we can not do anything with anymore that would end up in landfills. These are cigarette butts, soiled or used tissue paper, diapers, sanitary napkins, and paper or food contaminated wax-coated paper. Yeah, those will end up in landfills. Now, when you look at special waste, under special waste, there are three categories. First is the hazardous waste. So hazardous waste from the households needs to be separated. If you are from a commercial or industrial establishment, you have to manage it yourself. Hazardous waste would include paint containers, aerosol containers, and batteries, and even used electrical and electronic equipment. Now, healthcare waste, you know, which during COVID times has increased a lot, falls into the category of healthcare waste if it's coming from hospitals or healthcare facilities. Then you have the bulky waste that needs to be picked up, okay, separately by the local government unit. Now, the National Solid Waste Management Commission and the Department of Environment and Natural Resources have developed this public communication of solid waste management under COVID. You know, for those of you who at household level, because household level, we do not consider your waste as infectious waste yet. But what is important with the increase in the use of masks and gloves and even PPEs from the households, what the recommendation or the requirement would be for you in the households to decontaminate your mask and gloves for 30 minutes in a bleach solution. So that means 1 tablespoon of bleach in 1.5 liters of water. You spray it with the same solution, and then put all the decontaminated waste in a separate plastic bag. Label it as infectious or household medical waste. Yellow bag is ideal when you have yellow bags. No? Wait for separate collection by the local government unit, city, or municipal government. We do understand that there is rarely a separate collection system for infectious waste from households. So you can just give this still to your waste hauler, so that they are guided that these are potentially infectious that needs to be taken care of. Now let's look at the state of solid waste in the Philippines. Now the question is, where are we now? No? The government or the country generates about 44,000 tons of waste per day. If you are from Metro Manila, that's around 10,000 tons per day. The bulk of our waste are coming from biodegradables, which is 52.3%. You have recyclables at 28%, residuals at 17 or 18%, and you have the special waste. Now, if you look at the recyclables, now, paper is 8.7%, plastics is 10.55%. What needs to be done is for us to shift, the residual waste to recyclables whenever possible for us to better manage our waste. Now, if you look at this chart, if we are able to manage our biodegradables and our recyclables, then that should be around 70 to 80% already. And that 80% is actually under the NEDA development plan for diversion target by 2030 or 2040. Sources of waste, 56.7% comes from residential and 12.1% comes from institutional. So this waste is actually managed by the local government unit. Of course, if the market is a public market out of the commercial, that is part of the solid waste management plan or program of the city or municipality. Of course, the commercial and industrial establishments are mandated by law to manage their own waste at source. Now let's look at compliance. Compliance to solid waste management as of 2015, only 31% have access to material recovery facilities. This has since increased to about 35%, but still a far cry. So which means that, if only 35% of the 42,000 barangays are or have their material recovery facilities, then there are still a lot of resources that get leaked into the environment. Now, what's more important is when you look at compliance to sanitary landfills, where all open and controlled dumps should have been closed by 2006. As of 2015, the figure is 13.95%. This year, the DNR has ordered the closure of all open and controlled dump sites, and they have reported that this figure had increased to around 28.2%. Still, at 28.2%, that means still 72% of the waste does not have a home. Now, if you look into what type of waste is being generated and the impact of plastics in the entire waste chain, you would see that plastics is only about 4% of the total waste. And this is from a study that was conducted in 2013 in Metro Manila. Now, it's 4% is what we call plastics that can be diverted away from the landfills through alternative technologies. And for the initiatives of the National Solid Waste Management Commission, now we are looking at food waste management program. Why? 30% of your bio waste is actually food waste. If you manage your food waste, you decontaminate the rest of the waste stream. So if we separate, just try this at home, separate your food waste, and because that is the waste that would stink. And you will see that if you are able to separate your wet food waste, the other waste would be easier to manage. Now, if you mix them all together, you have a whole lot of waste that will stink and will be wet and heavy. Of course, we are looking at increased recovery rates for recycling and promoting consumption shift from disposables to recyclables, so that we can increase this level. For residual waste, what can be managed can be done in some alternative technologies or even energy recovery. And of course, hazardous waste management from the cities need to be treated prior to final disposal. Now, I'll touch a little bit on COVID. What has COVID done? It has given a shift in consumption patterns. What used to be waste generated from commercial and industrial sources have shifted to the houses. Why? Because of the closure of the restaurants, work from home arrangements. That means that everybody is at home and we consume more at home than we used to, and there would be more waste that needs to be managed by our local government units, especially during ECQ or enhanced community quarantine, where there is limited movement. Now, recycling activities were put on hold also. No, there is a sharp increase of medical and healthcare waste that needs to be treated and disinfected and disposed of in dedicated sanitary landfill cells pursuant to DENR DOH regulations. And it overall, adds strain to the already lacking disposal infrastructure of the country. Now, waste management under the new normal. We strongly support and promote uh, waste avoidance, segregation at source. This is critical, and management of your potentially infectious waste. Now, collection system, it needs to respond also. No, personal protective equipment for haulers and separate containers from household infectious waste is needed. Now, this is really a challenge to implement on the ground because while we are requiring the haulers to wear PPEs, they always complain because it's too hot, and they're not used to wearing those PPEs just the same. So thermal treatment of waste should strongly be considered to ensure decontamination prior to disposal. And the disposal facility infrastructure really needs to catch up. And once it has caught up, it needs to keep up. Industry needs to adapt also to the changing times. No? Try to source products and packaging locally to help the recovery of the Philippine economy. Now, design your packaging under the new normal, focused on waste avoidance. While plastics plays a critical role during the pandemic, the end of life must be addressed. So you can still design for recycling and develop and continue and adopt programs on the changing times. No? So the question is, what can we do as an individual, as an institution, as a business? Develop a solid waste management plan. Know your waste, and you can achieve that through the waste analysis and characterization study. This is no longer coming soon. No? The NSWMC has already developed the guidelines for wax, and these guidelines are available online. Now, set your baseline. Where are you now? How much waste do you generate? What are the types of waste that you generate? And set your targets. Where do you want to be? If your target is zero waste, when do you want to achieve zero waste? And more importantly, how do you get there? You need to develop your strategies. I always say, our choice, our responsibility. As consumers, we have the choice to buy products that we see fit. So environmental consciousness should be with the people. Choose. It's like in the internet we say click before you think before you click. Here, think before you purchase. Do you really need it? Can it have a second life? Now, these are the things that you should think about. And can you avoid generating waste? And if you cannot avoid it, what can you do with the waste at the end of its life? What is important is that you make the right choices and you make it an informed choice. Now, life cycle assessment, life cycle thinking. We always promote life cycle thinking. What do you mean by life cycle thinking? Before you purchase anything, you think of where the material is sourced until it's considering where it is produced or manufactured, distribution, transportation, operations and maintenance, and end of life. Life cycle thinking now is not just designing a product that fits the production, that fits the commercial needs of the consumers. You now have to look into where does it come from, what are the would it generate. Of course, when you look into circularity model, you would minimize the environmental impact of the products that you either use or products that you put in the market. It is important for us to transition from a linear economy to a circular economy. The usual practice of take, make, and dispose needs to change. We have to bring it back to the system so that we can use it over and over again. And in doing so, you benefit sustainable development goals that have been set globally and adopted locally. And the biggest contribution would be on responsible consumption and production. Now, why do we need this? Because your natural resources are not finite. So it is important for us, for the future generations, to have something, that they can continue to consume for the future. Now, we do understand that the linear economy cannot go to a totally circular economy So we are saying that we need, as we transition, let's look into economy with feedback loops, wherein we manage our residual waste, which will still be there. But as much as possible, we bring it back to the system whenever we can. Now, when you look at uh, circular economy, recycling, is a critical component of the circular economy. So you need to understand what is recyclable. No? For paper, these are the products that you can use so that it can be recyclable. White paper, carton paper, newspaper. Okay, these are high value materials that can be sold in any junk shop. Then you have the coated paper and mixed paper that is still acceptable in the paper mills. Now, what is important is that you have to recognize what is not acceptable for recycling. Thermal paper, carbon paper, waxed paper, photo paper, scented paper, paper with grease, and paper that has been contaminated with food. Okay, these are non-recyclable items. For example, your pizza box, your paper cups, your food trays that have been contaminated with food is not a recyclable material, contrary to popular belief. And of course, used tissue paper is also not recyclable because of the potential pathogenic and possible infection. That's why we do not accept it for recycling. Now, it is important that the paper is kept dry before you bring it to the recycling centers. And whenever possible, remove the staple wires, steel, plastic, and the tape, and tie it and give it to your recycler. Again, coated paper contaminated with food is not a recyclable item, and it goes to your disposal facilities. Now, let's look at plastics this time, right? Now, rigid plastics are highly recyclable in the Philippines. So PET bottles, for example, what we used to export all of this to China and to Thailand, where they convert it into fabrics. This is a project of the Tzu Foundation of Taiwan. It's a Buddhist organization that takes in used PET bottles, converts it into blankets, and the foundation donates it back whenever there is a calamity. By next year, Coca-Cola and Indorama had announced putting up a facility. So we are not anymore dependent on exports. We will have our first facility for PET bottle to bottle that will be put up here in the Philippines. Flexible plastics is also recyclable if you can recover it clean and send to the recycling facilities. So all those of you, I'm sure, have a lot of packaging materials from your online shopping network, whether it's a Lazada, Shopee. Please keep them clean, separate it, and drop it off at the recovery points because these can still be recycled. As you can see, plastic cups, styrofoam, straws, and even spoon and fork are highly recyclable materials. Now, if they are allowed for use. Of course, for residuals, there are a lot of technologies that can be adopted for residual. You can convert it into building materials like hollow blocks, right? You can do eco brick bottles. This is a model that started from Davao and is now adopted here in Las Piñas, where mixed waste plastic, especially flexibles or sachets, are converted into chairs by the Villar Sipag Foundation. Now you have the melting oven, okay, that can be converted also. This is more popular for styrofoam and plastic bags, where we convert it into functional products with used oil as the medium, as a heating medium. Then we can actually convert your waste plastic and mix it with your asphalt to do road pavements. And San Miguel is one company that is actively doing that. And then we are also able to put a percentage of recycled flexible materials into your regular products like trash bins, trays, crates, etc. Now, choices. Now, which do you go to? Do you go to reusable? Do you go recyclable? Do you go less packaging or no packaging at all? These are decisions that you will have to make as a consumer, and as uh, an individual or as a company. Refill. Refill is something that is being explored. What is important with refill systems is to ensure that safety and consumer safety and health is considered. You have to ensure that if the refill system names it as Silver Swan Toyo or Dato Puti Suka, it is exactly that will be refilled into your containers. We have to develop a mechanism that your refill containers, especially if it will be for food packaging, is clean enough, so that we can avoid contamination. Now, we also have to look into developing the local policies, especially for the FDA to allow this. Now, do you go bioplastics? There's a lot of talk about biodegradable and compostable plastic products. Now, it is important to look into what type of biodegradable plastic and compostable plastic they are, where it is sourced, and more importantly, what happens to your biodegradable plastic at the end of life. Yes, it can go back to compost, but traditional bioplastics would need to go through an industrial compost plant, which we do not have. The country is struggling to manage biodegradable waste. Question is, do you add strain to an infrastructure that is already lacking? More importantly, if we are to develop this locally, are we not going to compete with food? Now, if you go reusables, which is nice, you have to also be cognizant of the fact that water is also a resource. And there are reports that says that by 2040, there will be water shortage in the country. More importantly, wastewater systems. Are you connected to a sewer line? Is your restaurant, is your facility, is your house, do you have the proper septic system, to filter out or manage your wastewater before it is discharged into the environment, into our tributaries, into our riverways? Then, of course, recyclables. You have to consider recyclables under a circular economy. Now, I'm giving you some examples here. First, bags. From plastic bags or paper bags, refuse the bag and bring your own bag. Either it's made of PP, non-woven bags that can be reused, or katcha, or bayong. While bayong is in limited supply, if you can get the bayong, it's nice. But then you have to remember that washing is required when you use that. How about for beverages? We are advocating as an industry for PET, which is already highly recyclable for beverage containers, to remove the print and the colors. And we are starting to do that already. Okay, you would see that your Sprite, which used to be green, is now white. There is a reason why, because we want to make it more recyclable, right? And of course, putting Sprite here, I have to put Pepsi so that I'm balanced. And of course, right now, these are highly recyclable. If you choose to go reusable, again, you have to remember that washing and wastewater treatment is required. And if you go for glass, it's higher in cost and higher greenhouse emission because it's heavier, it's more costly to transport. Now, if you look at food takeout, and delivery systems, again, what used to be packed in plastic bags, transition to being, coated or paper coated or laminated. Unfortunately, both these are not recyclable, or not locally recycled, or not recyclable. So why not go for food takeout in microwavable containers? Yes, it's still plastic, but at least you can reuse and recycle it. Or reusable food containers. The challenge with reusable, again, it's expensive, and washing and wastewater treatment is required. If you have wastewater treatment, go ahead, do washing. Now, how about milk tea? No? Again, these are some of your options. You be the judge. No? Here, these are some of the items that we have not seen the transition yet. Do you go to for a reusable and recyclable plastic polypropylene container that is locally produced, locally manufactured, and highly recyclable, or do you go to a paper coated or laminated, which is imported? Your coated paper or laminated paper is actually imported, but it's locally converted and manufactured, but it's not locally recycled. Or do you go for plastic or PS? Yes, this can be recycled, right? But then if it is recovered, no? And your PET cups, mostly imported, but unfortunately, PET cups are currently not being recycled. So those who love the fraps, think again. Those who love paper packaging, maybe you have to take a second look. Now, again, other forms of cups, either PS or PP, these are recoverable, recyclable if it can be recovered. Coated or laminated coffee cups are not locally recycled. PET cups are not locally recycled at this time. And compostable cups needs to have industrial composting. Not to mention that it is imported and it has a very high cost, about 3 or 4 times. No? Then when you look at sachets, sachets, again, it can be recycled through alternative recycling for now. You can look at laminated paper with aluminum, which is actually disposable. Again, on the refill options, it's a safety and adaptability, especially on the lower income class, because they can't buy in bulk, so they would buy really thingy. And maybe you just go to a store, reach out, and then put it in your hand, so you don't need any packaging at all. Just make sure that once you put it in your hand, you go directly to the shower and take a shower. I'd like to quickly introduce the Philippine Alliance for Recycling and Material Sustainability. We have here our corporate members, which are the fast-moving consumer goods companies or the multinational companies, the quick service restaurants, retail, the resin producers, manufacturers, recyclers, and many more. Then we have the industry groups, like the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Federation of Philippine Industries, the plastic associations, the paper associations, packaging associations, and many more. We have the retail groups, we have the MRFs, junk shops, consolidators, civil society, and academia, and we work in partnership with government. Now, our objective is to develop and implement holistic and comprehensive programs to increase resource recovery and reduce landfill dependence towards zero waste. And our full waste recovery and recycling program had been adopted by the National Solid Waste Management Commission. Now, here are some of our investing partners and our corporate members, including technology partners, academia, civil society, and industry groups. These are just but some of them, but you would see here the importance of having a collaboration. We expect the membership to expand very soon, but it's a good start for us to have all these companies and organizations come together towards a uniform or unified goal. Last year, in January, we made an ambitious declaration, and this declaration is zero waste to nature with the ambition 2030 target. Now, in this ambition, we have committed that plastic waste, along with other waste, should not end up in nature. And we have committed to build the strategy, introduce enabling policies, and develop the glide path towards the zero waste 2030 ambition. And we have developed this with all the stakeholders, and we have developed this applicable and adaptable to local conditions. Now, the approach would include packaging redesign, design for recycling in local settings, and reduction of packaging waste. We are also looking into voluntary phased withdrawal of non-recyclable products and packaging materials. For reuse, yes, we continue to explore alternative delivery systems. We need to recover, we need to collect as much as we can, and we need to recycle or turn it back into resource. We look into both rigid and flexible packaging applications. Now, this is where we are now. We have seen that, okay, at least half of our rigids are being managed, especially for PE and PP. What is not fully managed would be the PET containers because it is highly dependent on the export market. We believe that moving forward, now with the 2022 being the start of the facility and expansion towards the future, you would see lesser of this red zone, which is undiverted, okay, into zero, right, towards the future. Now, we also took the challenging task of flexible packaging. Now, we have seen that flexible packaging, there's really not much you can do. But we, in the study, are able to develop a roadmap and a glide path as to how we can achieve zero waste even for flexible packaging. Now, all of that would need the proper infrastructure and policies, that are adaptable to local conditions for us to effect this. Of course, there are online courses uh, or sources for solid waste management. You can look at the TESDA online program for workplace and some modules that was developed by Nestle in collaboration with the Solid Waste Management Commission for parents and teens. Not to mention that there are also modules that was developed for the DepEd. Then, of course, in this same website, they have also developed some collection points as to where you can drop off your waste. So, to wrap up the whole session, we'd like to focus on tips on living and working sustainably. Segregate, segregate, segregate. Whether at home, in your workplace, wherever you are. Yeah. Start simple. Separate your food. If you're lazy, at least all I ask from you is to separate your food, the wet and stinky waste, away from all other waste. Do home composting when you can. Then manage your other waste. That's why in Tagalog we call it nabubulok at di nabubulok, just to make it simple. Then follow the hierarchy of waste as a way of life. Bring your own bags when you go grocery or shopping. Buy in bulk. Avoid small packets whenever feasible. Sachets are designed for the low income. Don't deprive the low income by banning it. But those who can afford shouldn't be buying those sachets. Purchase quality and repairable products. Recycle. And then if you cannot avoid, reduce, reuse, or recycle, you should dispose of things properly. Again, some doable goals. We need to shift use of packaging consumption towards recycling. We need to minimize packaging from sources where feasible, right? And shift to recyclables and set your voluntary recycling targets. And expand partnership with stakeholders for residual collection. There are a lot of social enterprise programs on the ground. Please support them and bring your waste to them, because they know where to take it and it will benefit, the whole system. As we have done our numbers, we have seen that investments for infrastructure on waste treatment would go as high as 15 billion pesos in the short term. We have also seen that this can provide 4,000 green jobs, and more importantly, now if you manage your waste, okay, even if you don't sell it, just give it to the waste pickers. There is a potential of 5.1 billion pesos additional income nationwide for the waste pickers. So, especially during this recovery period, we hope we can count on you. Other actionable items on food service. Straws should be strictly on demand, and only when the beverage calls for it. It should only be made available to senior citizens and people with disability for regular drinks. There's a lot of talk about shifting to paper straws. Remember, paper straws still needs to be imported. And my question now would be, what do you do with the paper straw at the end of its life? We always kid that it's a straw that gives you a time limit as to how fast you should finish your drink because it melts in your mouth, it melts on your drink when you're drinking. And then eliminate sachets for cream and sugar, except for the sweeteners because because of the safety now of contamination. Now, these are some of the things that can be done, especially in restaurants, hotels, and food service. Now, install grease traps and oil separators so that you don't, put more strain on our water system, and set up your wastewater treatment or sewer plants when feasible. And ensure that collected waste of contractors, okay, because a lot of you in the restaurant industry and the food industry hire contractors to do it. Make sure that they send it to proper recycling or disposal facilities. Now, because we have seen that a lot of collected waste from industry is also dumped into the waterways. Thank you very much for this opportunity to present to you, and we'd be more than happy. And you can contact me should you have any other questions. Thank you.